And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is June 29th, 2022. I will be following along in the issue that was posted very much last minute. I apologize. Issue 608. Apologies if there's a few items in here that I've already discussed that we can close out at some point. Just quick reminder, this call and all calls and comms on the RFC's repo are covered under a code of conduct. We ask you please be kind as folks are talking. Please raise your hand if you have something to say and we'll call on you. Essentially synopsis is there is please be mindful and thoughtful while on these calls. They are recorded and streamed publicly on YouTube. Quickly, I want to give the floor for any folks that had announcements they want to share. If they did, now's the time. One announcement from our team specifically, next week we will not be having an RFC call. We'll be away. So you'll see that the meeting should be canceled in the public calendar that we share, and no issue should be created. I will, for visibility, probably create an issue as I have before on the repo to pin it and just let folks know that we'll be out next week. This is a bit of a team-wide vacation, so folks won't be online next week either. So ideally, if you need a response to something, try to poke us this week before folks go offline. That is top of mind for our team. So dig into the first item in the agenda that we had. I know we spoke about this last week, and we may not need we could probably remove the label for this. Gar had spoken to this new feature to essentially add the ::, committish style pathing for commish. This is PR 91 in the NPM package arc. And I think this is now landed. So I think we can probably remove it from the agenda. I'm not sure if folks had any comments on this. If not, we can just move on. I know we spoke about it last week. Moving on to Luke, you had the engines support. I know this was something we talked about, I think internally, as well as a little bit late last week. I'm not sure if there's any update here that we wanted to give, or if we want to just remove this from the agenda for now.
Yeah, this can be removed for the agenda label can be removed. I thought it was, I didn't have anything slated for this week for this. Okay. We had talked about doing some more async discussion once we had concrete details, but I think we did all the discussion last week.
Cool. I just removed it. So great. Moving on. We're still keeping track of this one PR. I believe internally, Gar, who's now on this call, has picked up this PR, but it's PR 5000 against the NPM CLI repo. This is the NPM query command. I know that I think Gar has picked this up, so somebody from our team specifically is going to carry this through to see it get landed. I know I'd given some internal feedback last week or the week before, just about some things that we were seeing about some performance issues and just some bugginess. So we want to make sure this is a good feature once it actually does land, and also want to be mindful about the language we actually do support. So potentially versioning the doc, the query doc that we have in our personal docs is a good idea. This would be similar to how we version log files, versioning the actual spec that is supported by the NPM query, like the language, allows us to sort of incrementally add features and do breaking changes, I guess, in the future.
I have a question about that, actually.
Sure.
Would it maybe be helpful to make a separate package that parses a string and produces a structured thing, and then have NPM use that? And then instead of having to put it in prose in the docs, you can just say, this is the version of this package that we support. And, like how to interpret the structured data, obviously that still lives in NPM, but like, I don't know it's probably not the only way to do it, but it feels like a clean way to kind of wall off, like, this is the query DSL and separate the semver of impact of those changes.
Yeah. So I believe there are two separate packages that Roy had created. One is the npm cli/query package.
Oh, cool.
And then there's internally, I think there was a separate one specifically for just the wrapping the parsing, because we do a bit of pre-parsing before we pass it to essentially like the post CSS parser to get the AST generated. So if we ever change something there, we would want to, yeah. So, but you're right. Essentially, it should the supported selectors should be living in actually those downstream depths. So you're right. Okay. That's probably the right place to keep that contract.
Cool. Yeah, just like where the input is the string and the output is the AST, and then the rest of it is encapsulated away. And however that's done seems like a good approach.
Okay, quick, take a note of that. Make sure that that's what we're doing. Awesome. Quickly moving on to the next item that we had here, the 595, PR 595, proposing backwards compatible improvements to compression. I believe Evan joined on one of the calls I wasn't able to make recently and just shared that they were going to look into this more. I'm not sure if we just keep this. I don't think I've seen any updates since then. I'm not sure. Evan said he won't be able to make this. I just saw him comment on the issue thread. So maybe we just keep this on the radar and try to give him a bit more notice of the next call. So in 2 weeks from now, and see if there's any keep on the agenda. Quickly moving on then to the next item we have, which is yours, Owen. This is PR 593 or RFC 593, only registry fireballs. I know we spoke about this a bunch, and I'm not sure what the action items were from last week, but I'm not sure if you've done any work in the last week.
So I think the takeaway from last week was that this, given the trajectory of npm query, that this would be better executed through that instead of layered on its own thing. And your action item to me was to play around with npm query. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to, but if it's worth just adding closure to this and, or maybe it's a new issue or a new RFC that, well, yeah, I guess the question is for something like this, if it's doable through npm query, is the expectation that, because I think Jordan raised this a while ago, is like, if it could just be done through npm query, is there any reason for the CLI to like add any wrappers or like aliases? is this one of those cases where it'd be easier to provide like an explicit API that delegates to NPM query, or just give people like a man page of NPM query and be like, go nuts, like ingredients instead of recipes?
I think that I would say that like in general terms, we would want to extend probably almost every NPM command to take like a -- query equals arg, right? And you'd use that instead of, or in addition to, whatever other filtering commands were already there to customize what you wanted. And that prevents NPM from needing to add additional one-off things. That said, there will probably always be some cases where, for convenience or for having like sensible defaults or for trying to nudge the ecosystem in a direction, we will want explicitly named arguments and like simple ways to get to like, pre-populate a query. And I think that in the case of the only registry tarballs, for example, like we desperately want to nudge the ecosystem in the direction of like making it very easy to only have registry stuff in your, and relative paths, local stuff maybe in your dep graph. And so that I would assume that the best approach is a one-off command for that. And in addition to a -- query whose contents are defaulted by the other one, where you can customize whatever you want.
Yeah, so I felt like when we were talking last time, also, we were trending towards so we've introduced NPM audit signatures and improvements like that, like other subcommands to audit. It feels like this should transform into, NPM audit check deps or whatever the name is, dep checks, type checks or something like that, dep type checks, dep type check or something like that, like a terminology
only registry deps was alternative that came out. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just so specific, right? Versus like being like, this is the thing that we're about to do. We're going to check those types of deps, and then like configuring that specifically, like, I don't know, like, but yeah, only registry type deps, because like we don't want to create one for each type, right? And there's variants. And I think this is where I got to last week, where I was like, well, eventually you're just going to want to do a query for this. But yeah, I don't know.
So is the NPM query RFC already account, or I guess, no, Jordan, you're suggesting does a command, does the NPM query call out being able to pass a query to existing?
I don't think so.
Commands? Okay.
That seems like something that would follow up after query itself lands. Then we would start, like, then the CLI would want to start rewiring things to, under the surface, depend on query anyway. And then in parallel or separately from that, we could then allow people to directly pass in queries. Also, but like, I feel like the long-term vision would be something like that, where like the thing I had brought up during the query discussions was, it is a good thing if the existence of queries avoids people needing to ask NPM to do extra work when they can just craft a query. That's awesome. The only thing I was concerned about is if there is a need for a shortcut command rather than having to write a query, I don't want, well, query exists to be sufficient reason to deny that request.
Got it, yeah.
Right, meaning that the number of these one-offs should drastically be reduced as a result of query existing, but it should never go to zero.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds
that's my philosophy anyway.
Yeah, so it sounds like my homework assignment is to figure out how to take this specific feature and translate it into NPM query, and then update the RFC to be like, this assumes that NPM query lands, and then we can expose this this particular feature and it should just call or forward whatever to query under the hood. Because this seems like one of those clear cases where we want to nudge in the right direction. And then potentially it could be augmented by a separate query argument that is like global, that could, like you said, just build off any, it's like almost like a builder pattern. It's like like spreading an object into a new object, and the defaults just override. Yeah, the new object overrides whatever was already there, and then the rest kind of fall through, and then you get a final default plus user override config in one fell swoop. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can do that. I can update the comment. So I'll do the homework on query to figure out how to reverse engineer this feature through that, and then update the RFC to presume that NPM query will exist, and take it from that point of view. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think that's great, Owen. Also, I just gave you I think it's a one-liner, and I haven't tried myself, so double check my homework, but to quickly grab and then link that PR so you can start playing with query today. It's just like literally you can use GH. If you don't have GH, you can use brew GH to brew install GH, but go grab, clone the repo, and then check out the PR, which is great. But,
okay, yeah. I'll add that in so I don't forget. That's good. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, I guess you have to CD into the repo. Don't just run npm link where you're anywhere, but I guess I'm missing a couple steps in that one liner. But
all right,
I get for handwriting
and extrapolate.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be there in the comments so you can fix it if I get it wrong.
Thanks. Cool. Moving on to the registry scoped key file. John, I know you're here. Jensen, this is your this is yours, RFC 591. I'm not sure if there's any update that you want to share about this.
Yeah, nothing at the moment. I missed the meeting last week, but 2 weeks ago we said we'd probably go ahead and just start with the implementation. There were no real concerns on the RFC. So I'm hoping to get to that in the next week or so. So I guess when we regroup in 2 weeks, I should have some updates there.
Cool. I will add I think if there's no pushback, potentially we can also ratify if this looks good. I've give this a once over again myself. I know others on our team though had already looked at it, so that's great if you're going ahead with the implementation. Appreciate that, John.
Sure.
Cool. Anybody else have any comments on that? If not, we can move on to the few items that are mine. So I had put on and want to keep on the radar the various initiatives we have for the upcoming release, major releases. So NPM V8, we've identified a few last items that we want to ship in the V8 major release line. We also have V9 here and then V10. So looking out even a year ahead in terms of like the things that we might want to consider breaking changes in the future, things that can become discussion topics for the next year. But just want to highlight these again. We can go through at least the things left for V8, V9. I think V10 is a bit skeptical. There's a lot of skepticism on what would even make sense for V10 at this point. But just want to bubble these up, see if folks had any comments, want to look through those issues themselves, see what's being worked on, and just want to keep this on everybody's radar week over week as we get closer to cutting a V9 at some point here. So does anybody have any comments on those three issues? Any comments on how we're tracking them? They're essentially like these sort of epics with corresponding sort of minors and patches associated.
Kind of sounds like you should try and find someone you know at GitHub to allow milestones to work across issues. That's like how they already work within the same repo or across repos.
Yeah, there's a bunch of there's a bunch of things I wish worked a little bit differently. We used to use ZenHub for this exact reason, to sync milestones across the org, and use those as essentially sprint
Right.
planning. So,
but so my comments on these initiatives. So overall, it would be nice to look over the V9 list, and anything in that list that's a breaking change that isn't, well, so anything in there that isn't a breaking change should be ideally moved to V8. Anything in there that is a breaking change that isn't simply changing the default to an option, it would be worth evaluating whether that can go in V8 as an option, under an option. Because in general, breaking changes are much easier to deal with for users when they're just changing the default of the flag, because then it becomes really easy to insulate yourself from the breaking changes by hard coding the config and just moving forward. And you can also like anticipate the breaking changes so that you just remove the config later when you update.
So what I'll say is this is not a v9.0, right? So that's why the breaking changes will have to land in the v9.0, and that's maybe the
Right.
O.0, right? Like, and so that's maybe the confusion there. The features that are sort of queued up for this release line are things that we're looking out into the next year saying they will likely be landing in this next major, not that they will land for v9, right? .0, right? Like, so that's sort of the
so like when I look at the features list in the v9.x, you're saying that which of those things requires the breaking changes and which of them are just timing wise likely to land in v9? Because I think that those are two distinct groups.
Exactly. So we should break that out then. That's what's confusing.
And like, I mean, y'all set your own calendars and timing, but like, it would be really nice to try and prioritize getting the features that don't require the breaking changes in before the breaking change happens, because that like drastically increases the number of users that can use the new features. And it also gives extra testing time and all, like there's a ton of benefits. Obviously you don't want to like postpone the v9.0 forever while you're waiting to get features in. So there's a balance, but like,
there's also the balance of like pushing people towards the new version because it has the new features, right? Like,
but in practice,
I know
engineers
how
always
that works.
talk about that, and they want to like, they want to push people forward, but the ecosystem refuses to be pushed. And it just doesn't work that way. Like people will like, or let me put it a different way, is that the people who upgrade slowly aren't going to be pushed by this. They're just going to be inconvenienced. And that's true with every type of software, not just NPM. It's the ones who can upgrade always do. And the ones who can't upgrade can't anyway. So like, it's not actually helping anything.
So, but if we get like it confirmed that we will be backporting and it's like highly likely that we will be backporting v9 to node 16, then it's kind of like v8 is not will not be supported like the minute that v9 lands, right? So
yes, that is sort of a cheat code that NPM in particular can use to work around the problem I described. But
it's any open source project that doesn't maintain LTS sort of for.
I mean, yeah, it's a little different because NPM shipped with Node. So like, it's like, but we don't have to get all derailed on that. I guess what I mean is that is a stronger argument that the breaking changes should be as restricted as possible to just changing the defaults of config flags, because like that makes it easier for the people and more likely for you to be able to get v9 into node 16.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are my thoughts.
For sure. The last two, one, the dependency selector syntax. This is RFC 564. I think there's a couple last changes I want to make before we actually ratify that. Just like in terms of language, I want to double check spelling on things and just want to give it one more pass. before we landed. Also, because not everything, all of the syntax is going to be supported day one with npm query. I just want to highlight maybe that iterative approach again. We did that with workspaces, and I thought it was good, where we itemized sort of like what could land when and what was going to be initially added. So I might even pull things out of that initial RFC and then put them into a separate RFC, depending on how I feel about that. But yeah, we could just say that we are implementing a first set of the language and then have like a separate set that can come later individually as we sort of ship minors to query. So that's the update there. And then the last item here by Christian is the RFC 165 for adding a parent package JSON. I know this is something that Wes has previously championed, but never had an RFC for. Yeah, this has come back around, I think, because of the OpenJS Collab Summit. We were talking about extension, package JSON extension. So I'm not sure where we're at with this. Do you have comments?
I remain concerned about using this in anything that's published. So I believe all the use cases are for non-published things. So if we, or most of them anyway, if it's restricted to things that are private true, and like the feature just doesn't work otherwise, then my concerns are probably addressed. It's too early to like really worry that hard about it. I just wanted to voice that again.
So like a caveat you'd have, or feedback you'd have, is to add to this RFC, like you'd have to have the private true.
That would be a great way to do it. But on top of that, I would say npm publish should refuse to publish anything that extends anything else.
I guess I'd be concerned if somebody's already using that key then, right? In the wild.
Well, I mean, if they're already using the key in the wild, then that
we're
would
in
break
trouble
anyways.
either way.
Yeah. So I'm assuming we don't have to worry about that use case differently. But like, yeah, just both of those things, the private true and refusing to publish, would like, because the refusing to publish is the real important one. The private true will catch that problem much sooner before people to depend on it.
I think based on this RFC and historical conversations, and I have still a bit of brain fog here, but I thought the idea with publish would be that it would unwind and essentially pull in that package JSON and becomes like a mapping. So on publish, be similar to like actually doing like in lib npm pack, we would actually be, adding this as the feature that we would.
That's an alternative in a way it could work, but that means that the thing you're publishing doesn't match what's sitting in your source tree for the package JSON. And that's I know that's already the case for code when you have a build process and stuff, but like,
right.
I think that there's probably a lot of unappreciated, unintended consequences of that for package JSON in particular, especially depending on what you allow to be extended. Like if you put resolution rules in there, like main or exports or browser or types or any of those other, module, JS next main, all those things, like those are relative paths, and having them, like the confusion and there's no right answer reality of that is like, what does that mean? Is it relative to the package JSON? Is it like literally copied in and then it's relative, or is it relative to where it's defined? That's confusing on either side. And like, if you exclude all of the fields like that from being inherited, then you still get into that problem with any dependency fields. And so then like you start getting to a point where this extension mechanism has to be very proscriptive about what it allows to be inherited and what it does not and why. And that gets very complex in a way that is much simpler if you don't have to deal with it. Like if these problems still exist for applications, but it's less of an issue because you have all of those contents there on the file system. And so whatever answer we pick that is confusing to half the people, like you'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly because it's right there.
Yeah.
But also, like I've heard the use cases I've heard are basically like, you know, I don't know. I guess they're really only they're primarily, I guess the use cases I've heard do apply to published things, but they're workspace related, and they're like things like scripts and, you know, I don't know. I think it just dramatically explodes the complexity of package JSON to have this feature at all, but especially if you start introducing that into the ecosystem. So I think it's not saying it can't be done either for non-published or for both. It's just, it is not a simple matter of just put extends and point to another package JSON, right? Like it's very complex.
The idea that it's a template package JSON though, and not a like living source package JSON, does that not sort of imply that
how do you enforce that? And what do you mean when you say template? Right. There's no standard for JSON templates where you could say, hey, this is how you interpolate things. So like,
no, but we don't have to say that we're going to interpolate anything. Like we are literally if it's just not
interpolating. It's how is it a template?
It's literally going to be placed essentially. Like as one thing is going to extend another. It's object extension. It's like it's very like rudimentary. So it's rudimentary in its implementation.
That answers the technical concerns for sure. It just doesn't answer the conceptual mental model concerns. Because if I have folder A and folder B, and folder A has the template and it defines a bunch of relative paths, are those relative to folder A or folder B?
Well, folder B is choosing to extend from that package, right? Like if it's choosing to extend,
and that's a decision that can be made. But half the people are going to expect the opposite behavior. It's going to be very confusing. And when you try to debug and you find a relative path and it's relative to some random spooky folder at a distance and not the place where you typed the dot, that's going to be really confusing. And there's a lot of places in package JSON that can take file paths.
Yeah. Yeah. The other sort of, I guess, workaround here is just being able to apply, like running npm init as almost like a npm audit or checker, right? Like, so you can have an init script today. And if we were able to essentially apply like a validation step to package JSON based on this, and I know Wes has even created some tooling around this when we were talking about support schema and everything a couple of years ago, then that might help in this regard. So it's like you still have something at rest that is, you know.
And that I think is a different feature because that's not runtime extension, that's build time extension. And the end result would be a complete package JSON in the right place in the source tree. Like that I think avoids a lot of the concerns and complexities I have. And it'd be great to hear from Wes about if that would solve their use cases as well.
Yeah. I think he's got some of that tooling even. So when we were conceptualizing the Create project, we were talking about validation of package JSON and how we could essentially improve like npm init even. And because we have the ability to run against all your workspaces, like there might be something here that we could add into npm itself to apply.
And there might be a lot of power to be able to define your own like JSON schema file for your package.json. And that gives you lots of validation capabilities without needing to deal with extension.
Yes. And init and audit like immediately become like where we would use. Okay. Interesting. Anybody else have any comments on that? If not, I may just keep it on our radar for next week, just in case or for 2 weeks from now, just in case Wes or Christian circle back. And also want to open the floor because we have roughly 20 minutes left for any other items that folks want to bring up. I know there's a few that haven't been pulled in lately. Owen, go ahead.
Sorry, I just remembered for that last issue about the package JSON. some of you are probably familiar, maybe Jordan, but there is a package called Cosmic Config that I know a lot of projects that tend to allow like nested configs. So like the nested one overrides the parent one, and then the nested one overrides that. So you can have like configs at all layers. And anyway, in terms of like prior art, I know a lot of projects depend on it. So maybe if we want to leverage a familiar resolution algorithm for those kind of things, it could be worth taking a look at, because people might be familiar to it if they're using like ESLint or Babel or something like that. So I think they all.
Yeah, I think ESLint and
use
Babel
it.
are the, if those use Cosmic Config, then that is definitely the model to look at.
Yeah, exactly. So,
And, yeah,
so just a shout out
ESLint
to
is
that for
coming out
prior
with,
art.
right. ESLint is coming out with a brand new config system, and I don't know
Oh,
if it uses Cosmic Config, but I have no idea how that works yet.
I think Post CSS uses it too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got 40 million weekly downloads, so it's used quite heavily.
Right.
Okay.
Heavy hit. Yeah. Cool. That's it. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks. Any other RFCs, issues, or items folks want to bring up, discussion topics? If not, I can give you roughly 20 minutes of your day back. We'll see you in a week and a half, or 2 weeks actually, sorry. Yeah, thanks for joining us today, and talk to you soon. Cheers.